Imagine this: a faithful widow, a wealthy landowner, and a midnight encounter that can change everything. My name is Mary. Welcome back to Bible Study. If you've been following along in this Bible study series of the book of Ruth, you're in for a real treat today. Please be sure to hit the subscribe button below for more in-depth Bible study videos. Now, before we get started in this chapter, let's set the scene a little bit. The heart of chapter 3 takes place at the threshing floor. Okay, so you might be asking, what's a threshing floor? After the grain was harvested, workers would bring the stalks to a specially prepared area, usually a hard-packed dirt stone surface. This area was chosen for its strong winds, which would help in the next step. The stalks would be beaten out to separate the grain from the chaff. As the workers beat out the stalks, the wind would blow away the lighter chaff, leaving behind precious grain that could be used for food and bread. But that's not all that happened at the threshing floor. It was typically shared by the entire village, and it had many purposes. And one of them was partying. After a long and successful harvest season, the men would celebrate by eating, drinking, and making merry. But sometimes it was a place where immoral activity occurred. This is going to be important later in the story. Now, up until this point, Boaz has been incredibly kind and generous to Ruth. He's treated her with respect, gone out of his way to give her extra grain, and even shown a special interest in her. In fact, back in chapter 2, Ruth returned home from the field with an ephah of grain, which by some measures could be as much as 50 pounds. Now, you don't give anybody 50 pounds of anything valuable unless you like them a lot. This wasn't just a kind gesture. It showed that Boaz cared for Ruth. But here's the thing. Despite all of these grand gestures, Boaz doesn't make a move. Nothing. Nada. Sounds like mixed signals, right? But why the hesitation? Was there even any hesitation? Some scholars have suggested various reasons for Boaz's inaction in this situation, but I want to share an insight from John Piper that might shed some light on this a little bit later. Now, Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, saw everything that Boaz had done for Ruth, and since Boaz hadn't made a move, she decides she's going to hatch a plan. This is where our story picks up. Ruth Chapter 3, verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, anoint yourself, and put on your cloak. Go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lays. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he'll tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." You can tell that Naomi cares deeply for Ruth. Ruth has shown extraordinary loyalty by choosing to stay with Naomi, even when given the opportunity to return to her own family. Naomi, in turn, went from feeling empty and defeated to becoming a supportive kind of advisor to Ruth. Naomi knew Boaz would take care of Ruth. He had already been taking care of her. In chapter 1, Naomi had prayed that Ruth and Orpah would find rest in their future marriages, the kind of rest that comes from comfort, protection, and love, something she believes she may never experience again. But what Naomi suggests here is bold, even by today's standards. Think about it. She's asking Ruth to approach a man who has been drinking in the middle of the night with the hopes that things will just go smoothly. But what's really at stake here? Well, there is a reputational risk. Remember, the threshing floor wasn't just a place for work. At nighttime, it was also a place where prostitutes could be found. Ruth's presence there could have easily been misunderstood. And then, there is the risk of Boaz misinterpreting Ruth's intentions. Boaz is a righteous man, but if he thinks she's making an improper advance, the situation could get awkward fast. Despite the risk, Naomi's plan is clear. She wants to secure a future for Ruth. Now, it's important to remember that in these times, a woman's survival depended on these strategic relationships. It was far different than many, but not all, of today's modern cultures. So Ruth follows Naomi's plan to the letter, and here's what happens next. Verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law commanded. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet, and lay down. Okay, I know what you might be thinking, but the original Hebrew suggests that Ruth actually uncovered Boaz's feet. She wasn't doing anything inappropriate here. By uncovering his feet, Ruth is going to allow the cold night breeze to essentially wake him up. It really was just a way to get his attention. Let's keep reading. Verse 8. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Okay, this moment is pivotal. Ruth's words are essentially a marriage proposal. In that culture, the phrase "spread your wings" was an idiom for protection and marriage. By saying this, Ruth is asking Boaz to act as her redeemer, a kinsman who would marry her, protect her, and provide for her future. It's an incredibly bold move given the cultural context and the power dynamics at play here. Ruth is a poor, widowed foreigner asking a wealthy landowner to marry her. But this leads me to an important note about biblical interpretation. In the scripture, some passages are prescriptive, offering timeless principles we can apply to our lives, while others are descriptive, simply recounting historical events without suggesting we should replicate them. Take the story of Ruth, for example. Her bold approach to Boaz was specific to her cultural context and divine purpose. But in today's context, girl, don't propose to no man. I've seen those videos on Instagram, and sis, get off your knee. Allow a godly man to pursue you. Let him demonstrate leadership by getting to know you and asking you to marry him. Now back to the story. So what does Boaz have to say about Ruth's brave request? Verse 10. And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, and that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman." Verse 12, "And now it's true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor." Boaz's response is filled with grace and kindness. Remember, back in verse 4, Naomi tells Ruth that after she goes down to the threshing floor, Boaz will tell her what to do. And that's exactly what Boaz does. He lets her know that there is a closer relative who has the first right to redeem. He invites her to stay the rest of the evening, not sending her to walk back in the dark. He makes sure she leaves before anyone can see her and misunderstand the situation. His actions demonstrate his noble character and deep respect for Ruth. You know, there is something truly fascinating about how the Lord chooses people to teach the Bible. Each of us can uniquely relate to different aspects of the biblical narratives we teach through our own personal experiences. As a woman, Naomi's uncertainty about her future resonates with me, as does Ruth's determination to make a life for herself in a foreign land. But what about the male perspective? How might Boaz have felt? I'm going to read an excerpt from John Piper's book, A Sweet and Bitter Providence. Maybe it'll give us a little insight on this. John writes, "What then is going on in chapter 3? Here's my suggestion. Ruth has told Naomi about these words of Boaz, and the more they ponder them, the more they become convinced that they are laden with subtle, loving intentions. It's not easy for an older man to express love to a younger woman. It would be doubly humiliating if she declined, both because he's a man and because he presumed to think that a younger woman would be interested in him. Boaz did it with deeds of kindness and subtle words of admiration. He said he admired her for coming under God's wings. He acted as though she were under his, and he waited. In the course of time, Naomi and Ruth hit upon a response just as subtle, just as profound. Ruth will come to him in his sleep, in the grain field where he has taken her under his care, and she will say yes. But she will say it with an action just as subtle as the actions and words of Boaz. She puts herself under his wing, so to speak, and when he wakes, Everything hangs on one sentence and whether Ruth has interpreted Boaz correctly. I imagine her pulse racing as Boaz awoke. Then come the all-important words, "I am Ruth. Spread your wing over your maidservant." I picture an immense silence for a moment while Boaz let himself believe that this magnificent woman had really understood, had so profoundly and sensitively understood. A middle-aged man is interested in a young widow whom he discreetly calls "my daughter," uncertain whether her heart might be going after the younger men, communicating with a subtle word picture that he wants to be God's wings for her. I think that's absolutely stunning. This is a picture of two godly people saying yes in their own ways. So what can we learn from Ruth chapter 3? Well, first we see that God can work his plans through the actions of imperfect people. Naomi's plan had major risks, but God's purpose still prevailed. Proverbs 19:21 says, "Many are the plans in the mind of a man, but it is the purpose of the Lord that will stand." This doesn't mean we should act recklessly or without wisdom, but it reminds us that ultimately God is in control of the bigger picture. We also see the importance of character and reputation. Boaz's godly character shines through when he promises to do what's necessary to marry Ruth. And Ruth's character is highlighted when Boaz tells her that everyone knows she's a worthy woman. Having godly character and integrity doesn't just help us navigate everyday situations. It ensures that our lives reflect the character of the one who saved us, Jesus. So what happens next? Are the dark storm clouds that have hung over Ruth and Naomi finally beginning to break? We know Ruth and Boaz's story is headed towards something significant, but there is still one major obstacle standing in their way. Join me for chapter 4 in the next video, where we'll uncover the powerful conclusion to our Bible study series on Ruth. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for joining me today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more Bible study videos in this series. I'll see you next time. Bye.